Well, I am really excited to welcome everyone to our first session this week, which is called Learn More About Graduate School. So we're going to take today to talk a lot more about the things that you should really be thinking about when you're exploring options for graduate school and what graduate school really looks like. So we're going to do just some quick introductions first, and I'll walk you through what we'll go over today. So my name is Amanda Ostrico, and I'm the Assistant Vice Provost and Director of Graduate Enrollment Management here at the University of Kansas. So I'll let my partner and co-presenter here introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jen Roberts. I am the Vice Provost for Grad Studies. I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Geology.
All right, thank you, Jen. The other, I guess, kind of housekeeping item that I'll share is if you're not on mute, if you can mute yourself, at least during the presentation, that would be helpful. Certainly feel free to ask questions throughout the chat as they come up. At the end, we'll have time to really go over questions, both that are in the chat, or at the end, if you want to unmute yourself at that time to ask questions, that would be great. So the other two areas really that we're going to focus on this morning are talking about things to think about when you are deciding whether or not to go to graduate school, what graduate school looks like, and then we have some resources that we'll be sharing throughout the presentation, but then also a list at the end of the presentation. All right. So first, really when you're thinking about whether or not graduate school is a good option for you, one of the things to really think about is if graduate school is maybe a requirement for the field that you're in now, or one that you're interested in changing to. So common fields that require an advanced degree are business, education, healthcare and social services, and then science, technology, engineering, and math, or commonly referred to as the STEM disciplines. So in business, we know a lot of individuals who pursue accounting degrees often need more coursework to really become CPA. So a lot of times they end up going into graduate school to help out with that. We also know there are a lot of individuals where an MBA or a Master of Business Administration really supports their career goals. In education, there are a number of professions where having an advanced degree can really be useful for their careers, whether they're a teacher, a counselor, or someone like myself, an administrator in colleges or universities. Healthcare and social services, we know a lot of individuals pursue graduate degrees because they need that additional training. They might need that training for licensure or really to keep up with the latest in their field. And then similarly, in the STEM fields, an advanced degree can be really useful, again, with licensure, but then also really keeping up on the latest advances in technology in the field. So I would really encourage folks to look at broader data that's out there, looking at the occupations and the fields that you're interested in. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this link here, specifically lists out degree levels by occupation, and you'll get a copy of this presentation, so you'll be able just to click right on that. Those data are a few years old, but it's still really helpful, I think, to get a general sense of typically where fields require or often end up having individuals with advanced degrees. So still really thinking about those career benefits. Having a graduate degree certainly can improve your potential earnings. So this chart here is from 2019, and it shows the median weekly earnings and the unemployment rate by education level. So you'll see the weekly earnings are really the ones that are highlighted here, and the doctoral degree has the highest, which is just slightly higher than a professional degree, followed by a master's degree and a bachelor's on down. I should note that these are data for individuals who are 25 or older. These also come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics through the Department of Labor. All right, so getting into some other areas to consider beyond career advancement, some broader opportunities to really think about why you might want to look at a graduate degree. So a graduate degree can also really increase your ability to expand your professional options as well as your network. So one of the resources that both Jen and I will highlight is through the KU Alumni Association. So they have what's called the JHOT Career Network. They have a lot of resources there where you can learn a whole lot more about jobs that KU graduates have taken on. You can also receive mentoring from KU alumni with graduate degrees. So this is a resource I certainly highly recommend any KU students or graduates check out. This month actually is National Mentoring Month. And so as part of this, the Alumni Association has put together an event coming up this Friday on the 22nd called Exploring Connections. And so that's another event I would encourage folks to look at as far as the opportunities that the Alumni Association has when it comes to mentoring. And Jen will talk quite a bit more about mentoring when she goes over her part on what graduate school is really like. Oh, go back here. And then there are a lot of other opportunities really that graduate school provides when it comes to networking. So your own classmates often can provide great networking experiences. They often have work experience and become really great resources as you look to either improve your career or change your career. Faculty are always great resources. They can serve as mentors. They really can guide you to connect you and your graduate work to your professional goals. Assistantships or internships or practicums. They really provide opportunities to become trained and more engaged in your discipline. Your supervisors there and your colleagues there really become great connections that you can learn from while you're in graduate school, but then also later, certainly later in life and throughout your career. Research, if you are interested in a program that really focuses on research. There certainly are a lot of assistantships that have a research component, but beyond that, the research and the connections that you make with your colleagues at your institution and elsewhere really provide pretty incredible networking opportunities throughout your career. And then I talked a little bit about internships and practicums with assistantships. And so the last one I'll really highlight here is professional organizations. So some of you might already be involved with your professional organization, and that's great. I would just say that graduate school gives you even more opportunities to gain skills, resources, and connections from often discipline-specific organizations. So I can use myself as an example here. So my professional organization in graduate enrollment management is called NAGAP. It used to be an association that was really specific for admissions, and now it's really broader for graduate enrollment management. And this was an organization that I became familiar with while I was a master's student in the higher education program here at KU. And as a graduate student, I was able to take advantage of one of the research grants that they offer for students. And so it was really useful to have that student perspective. And then a little bit later in my career, when I could volunteer and spend more time really giving back to the NAGAP organization, I ended up initially serving on their research committee that reviewed and gave out those grants. And so even though I was already involved with this organization, I was able still to do it from a different perspective while I was a graduate student. And then even later on in my career after I earned my graduate degrees, I remained connected and can do a whole lot more to really learn from my colleagues and to pretty easily have access to best practices in our field. All right, so another way really to look at a graduate degree, not focusing quite as much on career growth or change. Some individuals find that it's a good fit because it gives them a chance to really nurture their curiosity about a specific area. It can also really spark their passion to impact social change. So graduate school is a time where you really do immerse yourself in a really specific area, and Jen will talk a little bit more about that in her section. It also really gives you critical thinking skills, and as part of that can spark your interest in larger societal conversations where those graduate degrees kind of influence the passion that you get to change and influence society. I've listed just a couple of examples at KU, some pretty recent examples of KU graduate students who have really made some discoveries or done work that's been really important to their field and society. And so these are, I think, great examples to check out. That first one is a pretty recent news article about a snake discovery here at our Natural History Museum and Biodiversity Institute. And then the second one there is from an architecture student whose study is looking at gender-based disparities in Bangladeshi hospitals. Beyond KU, there's also a lot of impact that individual graduate students have on their community, and the Council of Graduate Schools, which is an organization that supports a number of institutions and graduate schools, including KU. They actually have a project where they highlight graduate students' work and how it really is impacting the communities where they live and work. And so I would certainly recommend checking out some of the stories there just to get another sense of why graduate school might be a good fit, even beyond thinking about just the specific career growth or change opportunities. So there are a number of questions that I would encourage you to ask yourself and really think about as you're thinking about graduate school as an option. So certainly going back to the career question again, some good questions to think about when it comes to how might my graduate school work either enhance my career or help me to change a career are certainly good broad questions to ask, but then it helps also to get a little bit deeper into thinking about, do I need work experience before I start my graduate program? And if so, what kind of work experience do I need? Do I need full-time experience, like a lot of MBA programs require? Or would an assistantship or some sort of internship actually better serve my goals that I have with my career? A related question is, what do you need from that work experience to get the most out of your graduate program? So again, I'll share my own example with the 2 graduate degrees that I have, both of which are from the University of Kansas, from our School of Education. And I started work full-time in our School of Engineering, supporting our Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Programs there a number of years ago. So that was my really first connection to KU. I worked for a full year before I decided to pursue a master's degree in higher education. So for me personally, I needed that work experience to really know what else I wanted to do with my career and what type of graduate degree might help that. Two, until I started work at KU, I had no idea that a program even existed for higher education as far as that as a field of study. So that was something that was brand new to me that I would not have likely pursued had I not worked first. And then for me, and we'll get a little bit more into some funding options in a minute here, I also then was able to take advantage of my employer's tuition assistance. A lot of times you have to be, in a job for 6 months to a year before you're able to take advantage of those types of things. So that's my very specific example, but it does, and it represents certainly a population of staff and students at this institution, but there are a lot of different questions as far as whether you need that full-time work experience or whether you're going to go straight maybe into a research program where it actually makes more sense to just continue on, with your studies and knowledge that you've learned in your program straight on into that research, either master's or doctoral based program. So a lot of different ways to look at that. And then related, really thinking about, is it a master's degree or a doctoral degree or both that you're interested in? And are you interested in programs that really have a research focus or a more professional program? So, my example, mine was my master's program, at least, was a much more professional program where, you either needed to be employed full-time or have an assistantship. That's how much focus that program put on those professional aspects and really training you to become a practitioner. Whereas there are a lot of master's programs where, you're going to be doing a thesis and you need to really know that the research in that program is a good fit for you and that that's really the type of work that you're after. All right, so some more important questions, and I touched on this just a little bit, are about funding and the time investment that you'll put into graduate school. So I would say these are really important things to seriously think about, and Jen will also talk a little bit more in her presentation about in particular the time commitment, and then we have a specific session later in the week that's talking only about funding because it's such an important aspect of graduate school. So there's a lot of different types of funding available. I would say the most common forms that you'll see at the graduate level are in assistantships, fellowships, or scholarships, and those often are reserved for students who are in doctoral programs or doing research. That's not at all to say that there aren't funding opportunities for master's students, but I would say that you do find it more common that programs are funding those research-based or doctoral students usually at a higher level than the master's students. There's also, of course, loans and a lot of other financial aid resources, and that's part of what the session on Friday will cover, as well as things like employer assistance, like the things that I was able to take advantage of working full-time and attending part-time for graduate school. So then thinking about the time investment, let me stop here. This is another important question to really consider when it comes to the type of degree that you're looking at, the program that you're interested in. So for example, some master's programs can be completed in as little as a year, especially those that are accelerated or fast track type programs. Usually those are completed in a year if you're attending full time. So if that's what you're interested in, and you know that that's a good fit for you, I would say that's probably the least amount of time it would take to complete most master's programs. More typically, it's a 2 to 3 year time frame, and that can also kind of depend on part-time or full-time as well. Again, looking at my own example, a lot of master's programs are in the 30 to 36 hour range, and my own program was 36 hours, and I was able to still complete that program in 2 full years by taking classes part-time, but 2 classes a semester and then 1 over the summer. And so I kind of made up some of that work in the summer. So I was still able to start and finish generally with the same cohort. There are a lot of individuals who pursue master's degrees totally part-time, or might take them 4 to 5 years, which is perfectly acceptable. So again, it depends on your own goals and your own situation as to whether part-time or full-time is a good option for you. Doctoral programs, of course, take longer than master's programs to complete. Typically, they're completed in 5 to 6 years. And so that's certainly usually a longer investment than master's programs. There also are doctoral programs where you earn a master's degree along the way. So a lot of different ways to look at how you would structure your study. I'm going to let Jen really talk a little bit more about time investments along with some of the other things that I've touched on. So I'm going to turn it over to her. I will stop sharing my screen so that you can share, Jen.
Do I need to swap my displays, Amanda?
I think it looks good.
You can see. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Just want to make sure you guys are seeing what I'm seeing. I have sort of the exact opposite doctoral experience from Amanda, in that I went directly from a bachelor's into a PhD. It was funded by a federal grant, and I was done in 5 years, and then went right into academia, into a postdoc, and then into the position I have now as a professor. And so everything in between works, as Amanda was talking about. But I think it's important to know that there are a bunch of different ways to get to the same end. And what is great about graduate school is that you can tailor that experience to meet your needs in most cases. So, the first thing about graduate school that I'm sure you know is that it's discipline focused. And so what your, why isn't my, sorry, everybody. I am not animating the way I think I should. There we go. So, probably the most important thing is that you're able to participate in hands-on training. So that may be having access to laboratory equipment or field equipment or certain types of areas of practice that you really aren't able to access as an undergraduate student. It also means that you have small class sizes with individuals who are like-minded. And so you are able to really immerse yourself in a certain type of discipline, but also to be interacting with people who know what you know, and you're able to discuss things in a much more detailed way and help each other in ways within your cohort, either in a class or in a cohort that's moving through the program together, in a way that actually is added value to you beyond your interaction with your professors and your instructors. And then it allows you to gain knowledge in the subject area and to gain specialized skills. There are all sorts of specialized skills that maybe you start out on as an undergraduate that you're able to really develop at a much higher level that allows you then to be successful in a particular career that you're interested in. So that is kind of the first area. And of course, Amanda just talked about master's. Master's degrees are going to go anywhere from, a professional or even a professional science master's, a PSM, a professional master's, to a more research-based master's. And those are going to really be a little bit different in terms of how focused they are on classroom expertise versus expertise that you're gaining outside of the classroom. And so those more research-minded masters are going to probably have more time dedicated to research skills in a laboratory, in the field, in some sort of practice and specific type of way that you're gaining that knowledge or using your creativity. And doctoral programs are similar. There are several doctoral programs that are professional, where it's really important that you are a practitioner so that you can gain experience and use that in your doctoral program. While much of an institution like KU, a research institution, is going to be focusing on the PhD, where that original knowledge, innovation, creativity can be harnessed and used for a whole broad range of societal issues. The other part of this is that grad school is really student-centered. It really is a way for you to decide what you want to learn and to tailor a program to your personal needs, but also to your career aspirations. So, as I said, a lot of this is going to be based on original research, creative work, or practice. And that allows you to choose what that is. You should have a voice and a say and a part in determining what you're investigating, how you're going to investigate it, and then, of course, the creation of that original research or art or music or literature. And part of that student-centered aspect is also then the people you choose to help you realize that. So that will be usually some sort of, even in a professional track, you're going to have a graduate advisor or a supervisor and probably a committee. And you'll want to be looking, obviously, for somebody who has common research interests or expertise in the area of creative work or practice that you're studying. The difference between most graduate programs and undergraduate programs is you have a lot more one-on-one interactions. So you want to make sure that your graduate advisor and the people on your committee are actually people who you can work well with. And some of that, depending on what kind of program you're entering, may be part of a larger research group. So you're not just working individually with one professor or faculty member, but you're also interacting with that person's entire research group. So it's always a good idea to do a lot of background research. Make sure that you are talking to the person you might be interested in working with, talking to their current students or past students, and really get a good sense of what it is you want to do and how that person might help you realize that. And here I have just a link to an article in Inside Higher Ed that says how to choose the right advisor. And it gives you some guidance on how to navigate that, that more personal and individualized interaction that you have with a research supervisor. And that plays into mentorship. Not only is it important to identify a primary supervisor that you'll work with, but it's important to recognize that multi-mentor systems are always going to be the best way and the best support for you as an individual to be successful in graduate school, but also to help you then progress into your career in the most efficient and successful way that you can. So picking different mentors is important. It helps you personalize your experience and get well-rounded feedback. It also means that you can take advantage of not only that person's expertise, but all of their additional connections and opportunities. One of the people I count as a mentor from my PhD was the librarian. He was this fantastic individual who I would go talk to in the library. He got to know a little bit about what I was doing in my research, and he would find articles and leave them out for me, and was thinking about me and putting me in contact with information and connections that I probably wouldn't have had I not developed a personal interaction with the librarian. So it doesn't have to be people who are particularly in your field. The other thing that I certainly recognized as a PhD student who spent time in the field as well as the laboratory, had an advisor as a geologist who was traveling some of the time. Some people in my field go to the Arctic for 2 or 3 months at a time and are absolutely not available. And so having a broad network of mentors means that you can always have some people available to help you and give you advice when you need it, rather than depending on an individual. So those types of mentors, I've got in the right-hand corner kind of the different types of mentors you might think about, but it's important to recognize your peers will be mentors too, and they will be some of your best support network and maybe some of the best collaborators in terms of intellectual engagement and creativity. It may be professionals, as we were talking about earlier. It could be alumni or other professionals that you encounter along the way. But you also want to make sure that you are maintaining, your friends and your family connections, as well as any sort of connections either in the community of work, of research or discipline that you're in, but also within the university. So people like Amanda and I are those connections who can help with all sorts of ways of navigating the institution and getting you to where you need to go. And there are people all throughout the university who can function in that manner. And so I'm just going to reiterate some of what Amanda put up. Some of the best connections that I've seen over my career are those alumni connections. We have incredibly generous and enthusiastic KU alums who are thrilled to connect with current KU students and share their experience, share their connections. And in terms of our endowment and some of the funding that you receive, share their funds that allow all of you to go through the same experience that they went through and that they got so much out of. So keep in mind that is a incredible wealth of people who are willing to help you out, and you should certainly take advantage of it. So the other thing that's a little bit different about graduate school are the exams and the written product, the thesis and the dissertation. So while you still have coursework that you're doing and you'll have semester exams or final projects, you also tend to have for your doctoral program in particular, what's known as a milestone exam. This is usually a comprehensive exam. It may be an oral exam, it may be a written exam, or it may be a combination of the two. But the goal is to have your committee really test you to make sure that you are prepared to then enter into the research phase, the writing phase, the final phase of your thesis or your dissertation. So this usually is going to happen anywhere between the first to the third year of your training, depending on the discipline. And then you also have a final, what's called a defense. And this is usually a public presentation or a performance, or let's say an installation of art that then is afterwards your committee will give you an oral examination and ask you, why you did what you did, what it means, why it's important, what comes next, all of those things. And so those are, at least in the US system, a little bit of a departure sometimes from the way we are trained. And that's because we often don't have oral examinations. And so these are important to be able to move along in your program. And so it may be that you will want to spend a little time thinking about, pardon me, public speaking, thinking on your feet. Again, this is where your peers and your other mentors can come in to help you develop these skills that you may or may not have had to develop previously in your studies. And then, of course, the thesis and dissertation. Usually, you may also include other original materials like maps, works of art, in addition to data and analysis, but typically there's also a written document that then describes these. And so it's important that you're ready to develop those writing skills as well. And something that I always remind my students is that developing writing habits, good writing habits early and often is the best way through. If you you can do everything that you need to do to get your degree. And if you don't have that written document, you can't graduate. So it's this fundamental part of being able to complete your degree. So it's something that people think a lot about, and again is another place where mentorship and advice can be really helpful. And then time investment, I can give a little bit more detail about time investment, but I think the best advice I could give is just that the pace of graduate school can be very different than undergraduate, and that research and creativity don't necessarily run on a semester time scale, and things don't always work the first time you do them. And so there's a little bit more resiliency that you need to try to build to be able to kind of deal with some of those ups and downs that maybe you have encountered before, but maybe you haven't. For example, I had a student who was having to do all of her experiments in a national laboratory, and the government shut down for, I don't know, this was several years ago, but for like a couple months, and she just couldn't get in to do her work. And that's, of course, what many people have experienced during the COVID crisis as well, is that certain things have just shut down and they're not available. And sometimes that can open another door of creativity. Sometimes, there are some other things that you need to do that make your path through graduate school a little bit less linear than it maybe would be in undergraduate. So it's just something to keep in mind. So as Amanda said, full time is the most expeditious way through these programs. They include somewhere between 6 to 9 hours of coursework per semester, and it may include an assistantship, so a graduate research assistantship, teaching assistantship, or a graduate assistantship, which is work, so 20 hours per week of work that is directly contributing to your area of study, plus then some time for research, writing, practicing, and it may or may not include travel. And it may or may not include access to instruments that are only available certain times, or that you have to apply to get access to. So these are things that you should certainly consider. The other thing is that often you want to inquire about what happens during summers. So typically, for example, I get paid only in the fall and the spring as a teacher, and then I write proposals to get funding that help me do my research and fund my salary during the summer. And so sometimes that summertime is unfunded, but so you'll want to inquire about whether there is funding in your program, if you're going to want to work through the summer, if there are internships, if it's a necessity that, for instance, maybe you're going into the field, or you're going to travel to another country during that summertime. But those are things that you need to certainly be aware of and think about in terms of the timing and the funding. And then, of course, part-time can extend your time to degree. And so you'll want to think about how much coursework you are able to take. Amanda said she was able to do 6 hours of coursework or 2 classes, but some people are really only able to do, 1 course at a time. Some of our programs now are able to go directly through the summer, so you can kind of do 1 at a time, but actually do them back to back and take several over a 12-month period. But those are things that you'll want to inquire about, especially if you're working full time. And I always say this, that the key to all of this is establishing some work-life balance. I think that some of the most detrimental things that can happen during your graduate program is for you to set up bad habits that are bad in terms of your health, your interactions. You want to maintain relationships and make sure that you take care of yourself so that you can do the best that you can do as a graduate student, but also as you progress in your career after that. And this little picture is just sort of this demonstration of needing support and needing that network of mentorship to kind of weather some of the less expected time frames and new experiences that you encounter in graduate school. Although some of them are absolutely phenomenal, some of it can really require resiliency and balance to make sure that you're able to continue and progress successfully. And Amanda, do you want to?
You can just keep your presentation up.
Okay.
Yeah, and first I'll also apologize for anyone who noticed my cat walking across the screen. She doesn't know when she's supposed to be part of presentations or not. So sorry if that was distracting to anyone. So I just wanted to remind everyone of some of the other general sessions, as well as other program sessions that we'll have this week. So tomorrow we'll have someone from our Career Center and then someone from our College Office of Graduate Affairs, so from our College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, to talk about employment opportunities. On Thursday, I will walk through the application and admission process. And then on Friday, I'll provide a pretty brief overview of the funding, kind of the bigger funding options that we have for graduate school. And then someone from our Financial Aid and Scholarships Office will really talk a whole lot more about the types of financial aid that you can usually see as a graduate student. And then certainly don't forget about all the there are a number of program-specific sessions that are offered throughout the week. So if you haven't yet had a chance to look at those and sign up for those, I would encourage you to do so. And if you don't see your program listed at the bottom of the Explore Graduate School website, there's a link to the inquiry form. And so I would encourage you to fill out the inquiry form for the program that you're interested in, and then you'll still get more information from the program even if they don't have a separate session this week. Could you go to the next slide, Jen? And then here are some of the resources, some of which we talked about today, others that we didn't specifically highlight that I think would be really useful as you're thinking about graduate school and the different types of programs that you might want to consider. So we touched on the resources that our Alumni Association has for networking and for mentoring and really looking more closely at what those career options are. Career centers also have a wealth of information when it comes to thinking about graduate school and preparing graduate application materials. So I've linked here just to a couple that are at KU, our main career center, as well as our engineering career center, some of the guides that they have that really, they even have some exercises where you can walk through and answer some of those questions that we've posed, throughout our presentation. Other universities certainly have career center resources, and a lot of those resources are publicly available on websites. Specifically at KU, when you're thinking about funding and how much you'll need to invest in that, whether through assistantships or institutional or other support, or from your own funds. This program cost website, this affordability website, is a really great place where you can sort by your program of interest and which school it's in and whether you'll be likely in-state or out-of-state, so you'll really get a sense, at least at KU, of what those overall costs are. I've linked here to what we call our graduate program profiles. So we also have put together some general information for each graduate program that really gives you some quantitative data to just get a sense of what that program looks like. So from things like the number of students who are enrolled in those programs, whether they're part-time or full-time, how funding tends to look for those programs. So that's a resource I would encourage you to look at in combination with looking very specifically at particular program websites that can go into a lot more detail on things like funding, who their current students are, where their alumni are, career outcomes, and that type of stuff. And And then that last link on there is to our graduate admissions page. You all have at least been a part of that page since you signed up for the session, but that's where you'll also start the graduate application or submit an inquiry to your program of interest. And then the last slide, I think, Jen, if you want to click over to that one, has some of the other general resources that we touched on when it comes to really thinking about career outcomes. So that's the General Bureau of Labor Statistics website from this past year, looking at data on education and careers. Idealist.org and the Peterson's Guide to Graduate School also provide some really general tips and information on things to think about when looking at graduate school and the types of outcomes that you might get from them. So that's the end of our formal presentation. That's my contact information.